Hi, my name is Brian Brumbaugh, and I'm here to interview Tom Landry about his diving experiences. Tom, how are you today?
I'm just fine, Brian.
Tom, tell me, when did you start diving?
I started diving in 1970. I had a couple friends who had just taken scuba classes at New England Divers in Burien, and they actually took me out to the lake that I lived on and suited me up and put me in the water without having any instruction. My mother found out, and she just about went through the roof. And she says, if you're going to dive, you're going to take lessons. So next day I went down to Underwater Sports, to New England Divers in Burien, and took my basic scuba classes from Stan Lupke's in 1970.
Wow, that is diving in a lake for the first time. That's.
It was pretty boring. There wasn't much there. It was the middle of January. It was ice cold and not much to see.
Any visibility?
Not much. But I got underwater and I could breathe, and I thought that was the most greatest thing I've ever done in my life.
So you caught the bug in 1970, and how did you continue on in your diving?
After I graduated high school in '73, I was attending Shoreline Community College, and one of the night classes that was offered was an advanced diving program through Spence Campbell. He was teaching a NWDHA course, and I thought it'd be interesting to take. So a friend of mine and I signed up, and we took classes 2 nights a week at Shoreline. Spence was at the time had a program over at Bellevue Community College, and he would come over to Shoreline twice a week and teach his advanced class. So I took the first advanced class, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. It was just fascinating to me. I learned so much in the course that I decided to take the second course, which is an Advanced Diving 2, another NWDHA course. I went through that course, and Spence and I became pretty good friends after the end of that course, and he asked me to do some teaching, be a teaching assistant for him, which I did on his advanced classes. And we went on from there doing different things, and one of the main things that Spence was focused on back in those days was diving Cobb seamount. And after the 2 advanced diving courses that I took and helping him with his classes, he asked me if I would be interested in going and diving Cobb seamount with him in the group of Project Sea Use divers. And I readily accepted. And so in 1976, we left Astoria, Oregon on a Coast Guard cutter Iris and headed out to Cobb seamount.
Can you explain real briefly what Cobb seamount is?
Cobb seamount sits 300 miles off the coast of Washington, and it comes from a 9,000 foot abyssal plain up to within 120 feet of the surface. And it's the only open ocean diving in the North Pacific that you can do out in the ocean and still be within scuba limits. Now the minimum depth is 120 feet. All the diving out on Cobb was decompression diving. And we would go down and make, I believe it was 20 or 25 minute dives between 120 and 140 feet. And we would do different jobs out there. At the time, Project Sea Use was set up to explore Cobb seamount and the possibilities Cobb seamount could be used for. And one of those possibilities was a weather station. They envisioned putting a weather mast out on Cobb, and one of our missions out there was to survey the bottom to try to find a location for the seamount and to experiment in surveying underwater, shooting transits, getting dimensions, and to try to find a spot for this mast. So we dove for 7 days out there, taking shifts, sometimes diving twice a day, and all repetitive dives, all decompression repetitive dives. And it was probably the most spectacular diving I've done in my entire life. We dove through beautiful waters, crystal clear. The water was actually warm. It was in the mid to upper 70s, and the fish there were spectacular. The red snapper were so abundant that you would be literally pushing them away trying to get your work done. They would come up and they would bite your mask, and trying to do work around them was real difficult. At the end of the trip that we went out in 76, we did an experimental dive. I'd been working for the Institute of Environmental Medicine and Physiology at Providence Hospital, and we were comparing the differences between a chamber dive versus an open ocean dive. So we would make a chamber dive to 160 feet for 10 minutes and come back to the surface with no decompression. And we would monitor the results. At the same time this was going on, the Doppler was in its infancy stages for scuba diving. And so we would take and measure and monitor ourselves after the dive for air bubbles in the bloodstream. And you could hear them through the Doppler. So we make a 160-foot dive in the decompression chamber for 10 minutes, come back to the surface without any decompression, monitor the results. Then we went out and made the exact same dive out in the open ocean, out on Cobb Seamount. We'd go down 160 feet, we'd spend 10 minutes, we would come back without any decompression and monitor the results, and then compare the results to what we did in the chamber versus what we did out in the open ocean. And it was an eye-opener. In the chamber, a couple of us got stage 1 decompression sickness, including myself, which is skin bends. Out in the open ocean, same dive, same time, I got stage 2 decompression sickness, which is actual pain in the joints, and which required recompression, put back in the decompression chamber, and taken down and then treated that way. So that's what we did out there, and I only was able to make one trip out to Cobb. I had to work summers after that, but it was one of the most spectacular dives I've ever had the pleasure of being involved in.
Well, I have to admit, there's not very many people who ever dove Cobb Seamount. Cobb Seamount was discovered in, I think, 1957 or 1958 when the University of Washington research vessel Cobb was coming back from the Pacific, and it just went across it with a depth sounder on and found this mountain.
Yeah, that's correct. Fishermen had been losing fishing nets on Cobb for many years, and they didn't know why. And so, yeah. But
were there a lot of nets on it?
No, we didn't see any nets on it. We did not. There was a chain on it, but that was put down by earlier Cobb Seamount missions.
Right.
Called Chain Highway.
What other events have you taken part in your diving career? You stayed in the diving business.
Yeah, I stayed in the diving business. After Cobb, Spence had a company called Northwest Diving Institute, which I worked for, and we did some scientific diving at that point. One of the projects was a project called CPEX, or Controlled Ecosystem Pollution Experiment, and that was up in Sydney, British Columbia. And what we did there was we were actually pioneering a method of capturing water columns. These are 100-foot long water columns, about 10 feet in diameter. And we basically took very, very big plastic bags, lowered them to the bottom at 110 feet or so, and there was several of these modules that we had anchored out into in Pat Bay out of Sydney, and they all had to be caught at the same time, and they had to be up to the surface within so many minutes of each other. And so everybody would get down. We'd have probably 6 different bags, about probably 3 divers per bag, and everybody would be down, everybody would be set, and then we'd set off an explosion, and that was our signal to start swimming the bags to the surface. And these bags had a hard polyprop or PVC or ABS ring around it so that they would stay rigid on the surface, and we just swim like crazy up to the surface and get up to the surface, and then they would clip these on, and then you've captured your water column. And then the scientists could go back and study that water column now for months, and the water column wouldn't change, and so they could see what's going on in that water column.
You did a lot of commercial training also, didn't you?
I did. In 1978, I went and enrolled at the Highline College deep sea diving program, and it was a 2-year program. The first year was strictly classroom work, physics, physiology, welding, math, those kinds of things. The second year was all on-hands practical diving out of the Highline dock down at Redondo. And again, Spence Campbell was involved. He was one of the instructors along with Maurice Talbot. And we would spend the entire summer, the first summer, diving Mark V out at Highline Dock. And then we would move into all the other modern hats, Jap hats, Kirby Morgan, Superlight 17, Savoys, those types of things. We would learn chamber operations, we would learn dive bell operations, auto-operate a crane, all kinds of interesting and different things that we did. I graduated from there in 1979, and at the time I was working for Underwater Sports, and so I didn't go into the commercial field per se at that point. So I stayed in the sport diving industry, and I was later transferred up to Everett and ran the Everett store. In the meantime, I was teaching classes all the time, all the way along. And in 1982, I left the diving business and went another way. And
you've been active in the sport diving community.
That's correct, yes. And I still dive from time to time, not like I used to, but I still enjoy getting in the water and having some fun.
When do you think you'll get in the water next?
Next weekend.
That's the right answer.
We are going to be doing a Mark V dive out of Roach Harbor. And there's about 6 of us are going to dive, and it'll have been 35 years since I've been in Mark V, but I'll go back in and do it again.
Well, thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Brian.